If you'd like to get involved with Shoreditch Radio, or if you run any local projects or events, please contact us at info@shoreditchradio.co.uk.
Esky boy, don't know. Out to all my people.
Hello, we're Beambar.
Hi, this is Dean from Lois and the Love.
This is Roman from Breton.
I am Adam Fife.
I'm Orlando from the Maccabees.
I am Colin Peters.
I'm Lewis from Chapel Club.
Hi, this is Guy from Zulu Winter.
Hello, this is Carl Barat.
Hey, this is Rita Ora, and you're listening to Shoreditch Radio. Yes!
Good evening, this is the Davis and Watson Show tonight. Pretty much only the Watson Show, really. But I'm pleased to be able to welcome back Keith Raffan, former MP and MSP. Good evening, Keith.
Good evening.
How are you doing?
I'm all right.
We're going to be talking a lot to Keith tonight about the election campaign and perhaps a bit about his former career in politics. We'll also talk a bit about issues of the day. May as well mention that Liam is actually attending the football match tonight in which Chelsea clinched the Premiership. And I suppose that's worth mentioning.
All thanks to Liam, I suppose.
Yeah, all thanks to him, yeah. If you want to take part in the show, just please send me a tweet. The address being at DavidAT and then CAAT, David at Cat. Otherwise, you can always get in touch with the show via the Facebook page or the website page, www.shoreditchradio.co.uk. So, Keith, I understand you've had a recent trip to Sicily.
Yes, I did what I think is the wisest thing to do during a general election campaign, and that is to go away on holiday. And so I left here when it was in the 80s on the 16th of April. I thought I would come back pale and you'd all be suntanned, but apparently I'm glad to say you had bad weather while I was away, and I had good weather.
Good for you.
So, but the mosquitoes were out, to whom I am somewhat allergic.
You don't look as if you've been bitten too much.
Well, you should have seen me around about the 18th, 19th of April. I looked like the Elephant Man.
Oh.
I blew up. Well, just briefly, but
I get bitten by them as well.
I'm actually scratching them. It's terrible.
Really? I get bitten by them as well. They don't go for my wife or anybody like that. I think it's to do with the blood, they say.
Well, I
must be the hot Scottish blood that we have.
Island off the west of Sicily called Mozia, which is very famous for its excavations. This was an archaeological trip I did, and it was famous for its Phoenician settlement, and they were just dreadful. I mean, everybody got bitten, and our guide and a couple of the others, were a group of about 25, were in shorts, which was fatal. I thought that day, what a pity I wasn't in shorts. I'm so glad I wasn't. I mean, they really were. Every word was interrupted by somebody slapping some part of their anatomy to kill these things. So it was.
Sounds like fun, actually.
I subsequently met the archaeologist when we got down to Agrigento, for your listeners, Inspector Montalbano territory.
Ah, yes.
And Professor Falsoni, and who excavates there, and it's a problem even for the Sicilian archaeologists. They have problems with mosquitoes there.
Wow.
And so it actually, believe it or not, gets easier when it gets hotter. So, because Sicily gets very hot June, July, August, and actually it's a good time to excavate because they don't like the heat much either. Not that hot, anyway. So
it's not just us Scots with the hot Scottish blood that they go
Well,
after.
I don't know. Maybe they're just maybe it's the Northern European blood they don't get often enough. So they seem to focus largely on me. When I'm around, other people escape. That's all I know. So there you go.
You mentioned Inspector Montalbano. In fact, you're one of the few people I know who've actually watched it, but I'm sure there are people out there who have watched it and enjoyed it as much as I have on BBC 4. I think it's Saturday nights about 9 o'clock. And is it actually over-glamorized in the TV program, or is it?
I've only watched one or two of them. I started with the books and then got into them. Actually read one last night, The Game of Mirrors, which is probably one of the more mafia-orientated ones I've read. And it's based on Agrigento, which is on the south of Sicily, but it's actually filmed. They cheat because they film in Ragusa and Nota, which is further west, because it's prettier. But I think it's certainly a cult within. I've got friends of mine who watch it. In fact, I've got friends of mine, good Labour supporters. In fact, he's in the House of Lords. And former trade union leader.
Name
His
drop.
wife-
Please name drop.
I know I am.
No?
But he's going to Sicily with his wife this September simply because of Inspector Montalbano.
Oh,
I
wow.
think.
Okay.
Well, I think what it does is because it's so scenically attractive and it's always sunny and you're watching it in English winter, it is kind of appealing. And the characters, I think, are well drawn.
Yeah.
But
How do you think the comedy sits with it? Because it's quite very serious subject matter, and all of a sudden you've got this rather buffoon-like.
Catarella.
Who comes? Is it fine, or do you think it sits a bit uneasy?
Well, no, I mean, I think the characters are quite well drawn. I mean, they are. I suppose it's light stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not a fast reader, but I get through one in a night because you just do. You're halfway and think, oh well, I might as well finish it. And it's quite big print. So, but I'd kind of like the books. I would recommend. I know people who've got a shelf full of them. Trouble is, I should have kept a note of which ones I've read because I don't want to start reading them again. I mean, there are others I like. Other detective things. Obviously, Le Carre and
Ruth Rendell.
Ruth Rendell, who sadly died. I'm not an. I haven't read much of her. P.D. James, who also recently died. A near neighbour of mine, actually. She I read a bit, and then. I have read a Ruth Rendell, actually. I think I have read one or two. And then the other person whom I'm a great devotee of, and I've read all his books, but they're kind of more spy thrillers than crime, as is obviously Le Carre, and that's Charles Cumming, who, The Spanish Game, I can recommend to anybody. I think that's the best of his. It's the first, I think, and the best. But he's written about 5.
Okay.
He's only in his 40s, so he's got a while to go.
So it sounds as if you're much more of a reader than a television watcher. Is that right?
Yeah, well, my aerial went. I see. I'm also completely disorganised, and my aerial went on the blink during a snowstorm or a blizzard or a gale about 3 years ago, and I just listened to Radio 4 News. And actually, it's quite good. I mean, I think I was a bit of a telly addict when I was young. My father certainly was. His way of relaxing, and it just. I'm quite glad, really, so I haven't really bothered with the aerial, but I'm now being pressurised by friends to get it sorted before election night. So I can watch the results.
Yes, right. I have to do that. You're not one of these people who likes to, get together with a group of people and watch the election results as they come in.
Well, that's interesting.
The local Labour Party apparently are having a lock-in at the Rose and Crown for anybody who's left listening.
What does that mean? You can't leave.
Well, I'm sure you can leave.
Is this the new way they're doing their rallies? The Tories probably are doing it too. You're locked in, so you can't leave. What does a lock-in mean?
Well, you can go in and you can be there, but you can't join unless you're part of the parties or so.
I see. Oh, right. Well, there are things like that. I'm not a member of the Frontline Club, but it's near Paddington Station, and is really for journalists. And as an ex-journalist, I go along to things there occasionally. And actually, they've got a big election night. But actually, I've done this once or twice before, and I find it irritating because you want to watch things, and people are talking a lot.
Right.
And then, you're missing things and so on. I kind of like to concentrate on it. Also, I think the Frontline Club at Sky are providing big screens. Well, I don't want to watch that.
Okay.
So I wouldn't want
So
to.
the Frontline Club
BBC.
is aligned to some party, is it?
No. It's basically journalists.
Okay.
It was founded for journalists, and they have quite good panel discussions. Paddy something or other, who does the thing on first thing on Radio 4 on a Sunday. Paddy.
Yes, he's got a very Irish-sounding name.
Well,
but he's English.
Doesn't sound it, but on a Wednesday
right.
he does a panel usually there discussing the latest issue. But they get some good speakers. I mean, they what's his name? The guy who's in the Bolivian embassy.
Ecuadorian. Julian Assange.
Yeah, I apologise to Bolivia. Julian Assange. Yeah, the guy who founded the Frontline Club was the one who sort of gave him support and accommodation here initially. And at his stately home. The owner of the Frontline Club is a stately home in Suffolk. So anyway, but I think Assange has managed to alienate even most of his supporters.
How do you think that's going to unravel?
I don't know. I just think it's an appalling cost and everything else. I think he's a highly strange individual without commenting on WikiLeaks or anything like that. Well, I'm happy to comment on that. I mean, I don't, I think, I don't know what I think about it, but I think he is a rather weird individual. What worries me is simply the cost to the government.
And,
policing
apparently
all
his
that.
physical health has suffered a great deal.
Well, I'm
So-
stuck inside forever and a day.
You wouldn't be in the best of health, would you? I think he made an error. I think he should have faced the Swedish
Well,
court.
yes,
or
I don't
whatever,
think.
you
I
know.
mean, if he was being deported to some country of whose human rights everybody was deeply sceptical.
But Sweden.
Well, Sweden is hardly that country, so I kind of trust the Swedes to do the right thing. Or as Winston Churchill said about the British, they can always be relied upon to. Oh no! It's Winston Churchill said it about the United States. They can always be relied upon to do the right thing after they've tried every other alternative. Every alternative.
Are you a big fan of Churchill's writings?
Well, I don't know. I've read a bit of his, and I've read his.
Was this something he wrote, or
I
was it
like
something
just
he
like
said?
his quips. I like his quips.
Was that something he wrote?
What?
About the Americans, you can always rely on them.
Yes. I mean, it was just one of his sound bites. I mean,
Yeah.
there are numerous ones.
Yes, yeah.
And I read his supposed last words today, which were in one newspaper. I'm just bored of it all. which I find slightly sad. I thought.
How do you think he would be voting in today's general election?
Well, probably, probably, I don't know. Well, first of all, he switched parties so often, he'd probably be a bit confused. He not only ratted as famously,
re-ratted.
but he re-ratted. So I'm not sure he was ever really a Tory. I think he was
started with the Tories and left the Liberals at the time, and then went back to Tories. Isn't that right? Yeah.
Yes. I think he was dreadfully reactionary in some ways. I mean, Robert Roger? Yes, his book Churchill 1874 to 1939 is subtitled A Study in Failure, and he was obviously a very prominent politician throughout, from 1900 to 1939, though a lot of the time in the wilderness. But his views were extraordinarily reactionary on things like India, and and also the whole issue of his chancellorship and return to the gold standard and so on. I mean, he was a showman, but he was regarded as being erratic. Who's a sort of Farage with brains, brains and real wit. But he certainly shared.
He was a European, though, wasn't he?
Well, of course he was a European, but he shared other things with Farage, which is a fondness for alcohol.
I don't think there's a secret about that.
I mean, there were. He wasn't. I don't suppose you would describe him as blokish, as they describe Farage, but there are. Was he pro-European? Yes. I mean, of course, there's his writings on Europe and his speeches in Europe are frequently dissected as to whether he was in favour of the European Union or not. He certainly gave that impression once or twice.
People often forget.
What I say, in favour of Europe getting together.
It's often forgotten by many people. We don't need to name them. But it's often forgotten that he was one of the chief instigators behind the European Court of Human Rights, wasn't he? He was one of the people who pushed for it to be adopted, wasn't he?
Well, I don't know. You're way beyond me there. I don't know about that. I shall immediately check up. All I know is that obviously in his second premiership, 51 to 55, when he was getting very elderly and his strokes were hidden from the public, he didn't push then. And that time, leading up, obviously, Treaty of Rome. When's Treaty of Rome? 57, 58?
56, I think.
Yeah, well, maybe 57. Anyway, he didn't push for Europe, and of course, it was originally the European Coal and Steel Community.
But the European
Human
Rights.
Immediate aftermath of the war,
Yeah,
he did
which
make
was-
significant speeches in Switzerland and elsewhere, but it was almost as if. I mean, they could be interpreted as saying, well, the mainland has to get its act together,
Yeah.
but
I've read often that the European Court of not the European Union, obviously, but the European Court of Human Rights was his legacy. So
Well, I've
that
never heard that.
suggests
I must say, I've never heard that before.
Obviously,
but
he
you're
wasn't
mu-
the only person behind it, but I think he did.
no, I think he had lots of.
He
legacy.
did have a role, didn't
I
he?
have never heard that being included in his legacy.
Okay.
But it might well be in his legacy because I certainly may not be as well informed as you are.
That would surprise me a great deal, Keith.
No. I mean, I'll check up on that one.
Okay.
Well, I hope it is, and of course he'd be very unhappy with the present government's stance on well, the present Conservative Party's stance in European, which I think, quite frankly, is a disgrace.
Why did you say that?
Because I think human rights are of first importance, and I just don't think that we should opt out of anything internationally, which is there to preserve and improve and promote human rights. And I just think it's typical of the little Englander. Actually, they're not even an English party anymore because they're a southeast English party, the Conservatives. It's typical of their narrow kind of nationalism.
Although they're still quite strong in places like North Yorkshire and rural parts.
I mean, it depends how you define North Yorkshire. I presume you've been out in the fields and stuff. But, I mean, certainly most of Yorkshire is, of course, Leeds, Sheffield, and so on. My geography defeats me from naming a further city.
Yeah.
But anyway.
They're West and South Yorkshire.
Well, fine. But, I mean, North Yorkshire, that's where, yes, West and South Yorkshire, where the people are.
Yeah. So in
I
North Yorkshire, you've got York, which is...
You're always going to... What?
York City is usually Labour, I think. But apart from that, in North Yorkshire, they're all Conservative seats, I think.
Yes, but I mean, it looks as if they've got a huge extent of blue in the map, but it's just fields, it's not people.
Well, they're coastal cities,
Well, yes.
Places like Scarborough,
I suppose,
Whitby.
All right, yeah,
Yes.
I suppose, fair enough. I wouldn't call Scarborough a city, I'd call it a town.
Okay.
I don't think it's got a
Rural Scarborough.
cathedral, has it?
Well, neither Sunderland, but they claim it's a city,
well,
Not that I'm going
Sunderland
to have a jibe at Sunderland, but...
When Sunderland goes Tory, Mars will melt.
Yes, this is true.
Right. Next question. Before we get too finicky.
So tell me what you think of the current election campaigns by the party. Who do you
I
think?
don't think I've missed terribly much since
No.
when I was away for
But
10
I'm sure
days.
you followed them at a distance,
Well, I didn't follow it while I was away. I actually didn't. Until the last 2 days, I went on the internet. I nearly got locked out of my email account, but that's just my IT sort of illiteracy. No, I don't think terribly much has changed. Maybe at the moment there is a slight. Even I think William Hague said the other day, maybe it was after question time on Thursday, that momentum of the Tories. And then he said, well, little momentum. Well, just momentum. So, I mean, I think it's
not
so
very convincing,
I
is it?
think it's so slight that I don't think it makes much difference. Clearly, what is, if it wasn't for the Scottish situation, and then Labour would be heading towards and very close to an overall majority. I think that's probably quite clear. If you say Labour is going to get 270, 280 seats, but loses 40 of its 41 Scottish seats, or 35 of them, then you add that 35 and you get close, obviously, to the magic figure of 323, which is the magic figure because the 5 Sinn Féin MPs who are likely to get re-elected, of course, don't take their seats. So it's not 326, it's 323. But there are so many red lines about it. Everybody having said they weren't going to have red lines. One of my good friends who's in Scotland and who phoned me from the Scottish front today, told me that now that Nick Clegg's red lines are now up to 6, including public sector wages. So there you go. And then Cameron's come out with his red line on he will not lead government if there's not a EU referendum. And, Ed Miliband has got this red line, mainly to try to keep the Labour vote from slipping in the English marginals. He's got this red line about not doing a deal with the SNP. Well, the SNP don't want to go into coalition with Labour, but of course doing a deal does not mean not doing a deal, does not mean not doing deals on a daily basis.
Yes.
So, I mean, through the usual channels, which is how the whips operate, there will be discussions. There would be discussions in a minority government situation. I mean, the Prime Minister, who becomes the largest party, just may stay put next Thursday and say, I'm going to go to the House. We're going to have the state opening 3 weeks later, 27th, just under 3 weeks later. I will present a Queen's speech and dare them all to vote it down. And of course, the Fixed Term Parliament Act, which is becoming increasingly a significant piece of legislation, makes it very difficult for a second election. I mean, 2/3 of the House have to vote for an election, or for the House to be dissolved. Or, alternatively, a party loses a vote, a government loses a vote of confidence, and then there are 14 days for the opposition parties to get their act together, or the government to get its act together. And if they don't, then there's an election. And there's the added practical problem: there's only one party who can afford a second election, I would think, and that's the Conservative Party. The rest can't, certainly not for 2 or 3 years.
So do you think, if I follow what you're saying correctly, you're saying that Cameron, if we get some of these projections that they've, let's say the Conservatives are the largest party and they've got something like 20 MPs more than Labour, and nobody can work out any sort of coalition, including the Lib Dems, because that doesn't make up the magic figure. You're saying that Cameron would go to Parliament and try and present a minority government as feasible, and it would be watered down, and that would be daring Labour and all the rest of them to vote it down, and because they're afraid of a second election, they wouldn't vote it down. They would abstain, and it would go through. Is that what you're saying?
I'm not saying he would. I'm saying he could. But
you think that's quite possible?
Well, I think what we're going to see, and I think we've got to adjust. First of all, the first past the post system. The only argument for our, I think, increasingly absurd electoral system is, or used to be, that it provided stable majority government.
Right.
Well, it didn't last time, and it's not going to this Thursday. So that's the first point to make about the system. He could be entitled. I'm not saying that he necessarily, the leader of the largest party will become prime minister, because I don't think it necessarily works out that way. I mean, we have to go back to 1924 when that situation changed. Stanley Baldwin got voted down, and then Ramsay MacDonald came in, for your older listeners, that is. And
I don't know if anybody's that old.
It's a bit before my time. But
Yeah,
anyway,
even before my mother's time.
But I think we're in an imponderable situation. I think what happened last time, and I was surprised about it, as somebody who was in the periphery. Well, I wasn't just in the periphery. I was consulted as a member of the Scottish Parliament, Liberal Democrats. I was consulted on the LibLab deal in '99, and it took 2 weeks. And I think what really surprised me last time was that it was all concluded in 3 or 4 or 5 days. But there were 2 stages. There was the coalition agreement, and then there was 10 days later the programme for government. Now, some people say that the then Cabinet Secretary rushed the process because he was worried about the markets. I don't think that's necessarily true, but there certainly was a feeling that they had to, because of the financial position internationally and within Britain, that they had to move quickly. I think they're more relaxed about it this time. Some of our constitutional experts, like Vernon Bognor, Robert Hazel, Peter Riddell at the Institute of Government, Robert Hazel's at the Constitution Unit at UCL, Vernon Bognor's at King's College. I mean, they basically think it could take up to 2 weeks.
That's what the Observer was saying this morning, wasn't it?
Yeah, well, it could take up to 2 weeks. And the Cabinet Secretary will make, facilities available. Civil servants will be there to be consulted. They won't sit in meetings. Jim Wallace is the one who put the kibosh on this last time round, because
Jim Wallace, a Liberal Democrat.
Yeah, and the
MP.
former Deputy First Minister of Scotland, because he said if you have civil servants present, then it could be subject to freedom of information.
Okay.
So they can't have full and frank discussions, clearly.
Interesting.
So the civil servants will be there to be consulted, and certainly on the detail, and produce briefing papers if they're helpful. But they'll have the facilities, and I think it's more complex this time. I heard Gus O'Donnell speak about it as Cabinet Secretary. It's going to be more complex. There are going to be discussions going on between different people.
Yeah. So I hope we're keeping everybody in this murky world of negotiations.
Well, it's very interesting. I think almost, people are pretty fed up with the campaign, because we've known for several years when the election was going to be. It's been going on forever. The most interesting things are now election night and the aftermath.
Yeah. What do you think of the way the Conservatives have run their campaign? Do you think they've moved quite far away from the old style Tory electioneering? And
What do you mean by that?
Well, it used to be One Nation Conservatives, didn't it?
Well, that's.
Have they dropped that
prehistory.
pretense completely?
Well, I think Mrs. Thatcher dropped that. I mean, it was.
Don't you think Cameron still believes in the One Nation?
I don't know. Well, if he does, he keeps it a well-hidden secret. And maybe it's under Sam Cam's pillow. I don't know. It doesn't emerge very often. I think his instincts are pragmatic, probably. I think he's quite weak. I think he's keeps on throwing red meat to the nutters in his party, the Europhobic nutters, of which there were about half a dozen when I was there. There are now about 60. And I think I think they're now halfway up his arm. I've said this before. One of my favourite analogies. And of course, it's going to be a lot more difficult for him this time because they were irked by the way he conducted the coalition negotiations last time. First of all, the right wing of his party felt he should have won an overall majority. He fought a bad campaign last time. I think that's unfair. I think it's unfair in the sense that he should have won an overall majority because he had a very steep mountain to climb. They are right that his campaign was awful. I was going to use another word, but I've tried it on a polite.
We're on the radio.
We were on polite frequency. But anyway, so that was it. But he's going to have to. So the 22 committee, which is the committee of Tory backbenchers, are going to have a say. There's going to be consultation. In the papers today, there's pressure for a referendum of members. In other words, the members are consulted, which could delay things, and a secret ballot, which could make things even worse. And they're trying to tie his hands in these negotiations. And
yeah, I've heard that they won't enter into a coalition with the Liberal Democrats. They'd rather, which is a bit like some people in Labour saying that they won't go into any sort of arrangement with the Scottish Nationalists.
I think they probably would do a deal with the Liberal Democrats. Of course, the problem there is whether the Liberal Democrats will do a deal with them.
Yes.
I think Clegg might.
As you say, there are a lot of red lines being drawn. Do you think there are too many red lines being drawn?
Just one thing on this, quickly. I think the LibDem activists may well not want to go in with the Tories again. They have lost. Look what going into coalition with the Tories has done to the Liberal Democrats. They have lost 2/3 of their members. They've lost two-thirds of their members. They've lost half their councillors, and they're about to probably lose half their MPs.
Massacre.
As someone once said, I think it was Einstein, insanity is doing the same thing again and again and expecting different results.
I like that song. I like that quote. Insanity is doing the same thing again and expecting different results.
Same thing again and again, expecting different results.
On that note, we're going to go to a song. We'll be back just after this break with Keith Raffan.
You're listening to Shoreditch Radio. Yes!
Welcome back to this election special with me, David Watson, and former Conservative and LibDem MP, or I should say LibDem MSP, Keith Raffan. We're talking about the election. That was Rolling Stones and Miss You. And it gave us a bit of nostalgia for the 80s, didn't it, Keith? Which actually caused Keith to mention Keith Richards, whom he saw in the street the other day. Is that right?
Well, I know he's looking a bit. Well, he just looks a bit rattled.
I think, he's alive.
You have nostalgia for the 80s? You have nostalgia for the 80s and Mrs. Thatcher, I certainly do.
Oh, not necessarily the political scene at the time, but the music. That's the time when I was a teenager, so...
Yeah, yes, well, I was in Parliament. I was in the House of Commons then, but as a Tory, under her, so to speak.
Yeah.
And not the happiest years of my life, but there we go.
So you don't feel nostalgic for that time?
I do. I mean, I mean, melancholic probably a bit that I could have done things differently and so on, and I'd do them differently again. if I was
Arguably,
back.
your most successful period in your career, no? You know, you'd have had the highest profile or not?
Arguably, the only. I mean, I don't think. I mean, I think probably arguably I got elected. That's probably, that might be the success. I'm not sure I've ever been successful. The only thing I agree with Enoch Powell about is all political careers end in failure.
Although
Miss Sturgeon should beware of that.
he was opposed to the nuclear deterrent as well, wasn't he? I thought that was something he was right
I
on.
don't know. I didn't follow his views intimately. I was opposed to the renewal of Trident. Then I remember getting hauled in by Michael Heseltine.
Oh, were you one of Tories against, what was it, Tories against Cruise and Trident?
Well, I mean, you just felt it was the expense, and I'm glad to see that Michael Portillo came out against it.
Yeah,
after he was former Secretary of State for Defence.
I remember seeing this Question Time edition when Robin Day was in charge, and seeing this argument between Enoch Powell and Michael Heseltine, where you expect as two Tories, although Powell was with the Ulster Unionists at the time, I thought there'd be some sort of amicability, but they clearly hated each other. I think Heseltine said that something Powell said was crassly stupid. It drew quite a gasp from the audience,
I think it grew a gasp. I mean, the one thing, I think that Enoch Powell was intellectually brilliant. I mean, youngest professor of Greek.
But emotionally,
ever known at Sydney, albeit.
Yes.
Nothing wrong with Sydney, but at the age of 26. Yeah, but he had crazy political ideas, and I think in some cases, ones which were extremely damaging to this country and obviously to race relations. I mean, and what he said, and there was an intellectual man, and using these phrases like the Tiber foaming with blood.
Yes, well,
if you're the one thing you expect from somebody who has got a very good brain and intellect. So clearly some wires were not connected up there in his case, is you do expect rationality, you don't expect hysteria.
Yeah. I kind of think he was rational, but coldly rational, and perhaps emotionally constipated. He didn't seem to be connected emotionally to people.
Well, I don't know about that.
But he's alive, His ghost is, look at UKIP. They follow his policies pretty much to the letter.
I think he was so much of a maverick. I don't think he would certainly find loads to disagree with him.
No, I think he'd be with them.
Well, I don't think so.
His main issue was the European Union, after all, and immigration, and that's what they're about.
Yes, but he wouldn't. He wouldn't regard them as intellectually serious. He'd regard them as basically in another planet.
And for which reason, universe. I'm with Russell Brand when he said that Farage is a pound shop Enoch Powell. Absolutely, I thought that was a great zinger. That was a great line.
Well, yes, he should be writing. He should be a headline writer for other tabloids. Russell Brand.
Do you not like him?
Oh, I think he's just, he's just another one, isn't he? He's just a ranter.
No, but he has something interesting to say.
Well,
even if you don't agree with him.
I don't think telling people not to vote is an interesting thing to say.
No, but what I think was good about that was that it actually raised it as a topic to talk about. Is it worth voting? I disagree with him, but actually people got talking about whether it was worth voting or not. Does it change anything?
Well,
and actually, I think...
I do know certainly people around me didn't. I mean, I don't mind Ed Miliband getting interviewed by him, or
I think that was a good idea by
going
Miliband.
to his palatial kitchen.
Because people who wouldn't normally listen to politics shows watch his show, watch the Truth channel.
He's certainly got a smarter kitchen than Ed Miliband, that's for sure. Albeit
he probably earns a lot more.
Only one. But anyway, I'm not having a go at Ed Miliband. I thought that was all stupid business. But I think being interviewed with somebody who's got 2 million followers on Twitter.
Politically astute, isn't it?
Twitter. Well, I think trying to access the young vote, why not?
Yeah.
I don't think, the Tories were just jealous.
Yeah,
they weren't
I agree.
asked.
Yeah, I agree.
And, I think it's worth doing. I think all the attack on Miliband. So much of this election has been boring and sterile, and probably boring and sterile for the audience tonight. Everybody just wants it to be over. I think the trouble with the fixed term Parliament Act.
You're not supposed to say that, Keith. You're supposed to say, everybody, we're having an exciting discussion here.
One of the problems with it is that everybody's known this blooming thing was going to be in May the 7th this year for the last 5 years. And, there's no sort of surprise and the fact is it's just been going on forever. That's the problem, I think, slightly. And the other thing is the way the leaders have fought the campaign. I think are all to be criticised for this, except Nicola Sturgeon, and that is that they have all been far too protected. They go into aircraft hangars, speak to their own activists. They daren't encounter the Gillian Duffys of this world, except on Question Time last week, where Yorkshire deserves a AAA rating for giving them a hard time. And the only one who's actually...
Or triple X rating.
The one who's only had... what a Scottish friend of mine phoned me yesterday to say uncontrolled access to people is Nicola Sturgeon. When she visited Inverness yesterday, was absolutely astounding when her helicopter arrived. It was described to be by an understated Highlander, a sky man, and they are understated. He said it was like a papal visit. I mean, the crowds were enormous. Highlanders don't usually behave that way. There's something happening up there which is quite different from the rest of the country.
Yes. So we have raised the Scottish question. So I have to ask you, if you're in Scotland at the moment, would you be voting for the SNP?
No, I wouldn't. I'm a unionist. I'm not. I'm not. I think we're better together. We're a little dot in the very edge of our own little, the Milky Way or whatever. I think for us to split up into further smaller units is a bit nuts. I think. You want local self-government as far as possible, but as a unit and counting for. As a country, within the world and having some influence, first of all, within the European Union and the broader international community, I think we're better together. It's as simple as that. God, I sound like that was the blooming slogan, that dreadful slogan of last year. But
let me just pick that.
I think the fact is, I'm 3/4 Scottish and 1/4 English, and most of us are mongrels or hybrids, and I think even. Nicola Sturgeon's granny was born in Northampton.
And she still lives in England. She's in Sunderland, apparently.
Well, she's moved further north. I thought she was in Northampton. Maybe she's moving closer.
Well, yes. But, but let me ask you, though, because let's pick this apart from it. Just because you're voting for the SNP, logically, doesn't mean to say, at the moment, the way the SNP are fighting this, is it's not a referendum on whether Scotland should be independent. The SNP have clearly and categorically said that they're fighting on an issue-based platform, and if you think that only 45% of the electorate voted for an independent Scotland, and now more than 50% are expected to vote for the SNP, there are a lot of unionists, people presumably who still want to stay within the UK, who are voting SNP. So you can still vote for SNP and still want to maintain the union.
Oh, indeed. And I was, my own little poll, when I was on my Sicilian trip, I had 3 delightful ladies from Glasgow. One from Newton Mearns, which I don't know is probably the Chelsea or Belgravia of Glasgow. But they weren't, they were very down to earth. They came from Labour families and they were all voting SNP, but one of them had voted no in the referendum. So you're right on that point. But, this has been something that has been brewing for a while. To say this has suddenly happened it just shows your ignorance, or not your ignorance personally, but people's ignorance of Scottish politics. In 2011, the SNP got 45% of the vote at Holyrood. Now, they're only marginally above that now, and around about that figure, within the margin of error, and I certainly think it probably will be higher. But so basically, what has happened is that was at Holyrood, and the usual thing was that their vote never reached that kind of level at Westminster.
Yes,
it kind of collapsed.
Right. Yeah.
Well, that clearly isn't happening. I think there's several reasons for that. Partly, I think the Labour Party has, for a long time, taken its Scottish seats for granted. Mm-hmm. That's the first point. Second point, it was slow to react and respond to what happened in 2011, and it was complacent. It didn't think it would be transferred, this SNP vote, to Westminster elections. And then, of course, you have the referendum, where the Labour Party, Scottish Labour Party, found itself on the side of the Scottish Tories. Well, the Scottish Tories are completely toxic up there, so... the deal was that the Tories would put up the money and Labour would lead the campaign, but the Tories were quite visible during the campaign. I think it's kind of supported the SNP line that Labour Tory light, which I don't think they are. But the SNP are getting away with an awful lot, because the increase in health spending and education spending has been less than the coalitions within England. And so,
but then they do spend more per head
No,
anyway.
they spend more per head, but the increase is what I'm talking about.
Yeah,
Of course, they
okay.
spend more per head because of the Barnett formula, which is very favourable. So, it won't last forever. And the S&P has a habit, I don't know, a habit. This is the second time it's happened, but they zoomed up in October 74 to 11 seats from only 2 in 1970, the 6 in February 74. They lost most of those seats. They're back down to 2 in 79. The S&P are they don't want a second election. I can tell you that for two reasons. One, they don't want a repeat of that, of getting punished for bringing a Labour government possibly down. And secondly, they want their new tranche of MPs, which maybe go up from 60 to 45 or even higher. They want them to have a chance to bed down in their constituencies
Sure.
and build up a following.
Yeah.
So they don't want a second election. And Labour know that too. There are all these things, there are all these different, and also, of course, the other thing in the whole equation is how many seats the Liberal Democrats will lose.
Yeah.
I've got a feeling, I think they deserve to be punished for going in with a nasty party. I say that, having a former Liberal Democrat. I do. I mean, I think they've gone along with things they shouldn't have gone along with. You should never have allowed the health service reforms even to get off the ground and waste all that money and time. But I've got a feeling that during the campaign, it's slightly edged up. I would think it's quite possible they'll be between 25 and 30.
Now, you made me giggle a wee bit, Keith, because you said the nasty party and you're talking about the Conservatives, yeah? But you used to be in the Conservative Party. So
I used to be in...
what happened to you that you left the Conservative
Well, it's not,
Party?
don't ask. I'm completely unimportant. Ask what happened to the Conservative Party. Speak to them. I mean, I was in a Conservative Party which was one nation, Liberal with a small L. I was in the party of Macmillan, MacLeod, Butler, and so on, which probably most of your listeners can't even remember, but they can read the history in Wikipedia. But anyway, the point is the Conservative Party changed. I'm still a centrist social democrat as I always was. I'm probably moving to the left.
Yeah.
I think there needs to be a ratchet back to left. I'm certainly voting Labour in the extremely marginal seat of Kensington on Thursday. I'm voting Labour because I don't know the candidate, but I'm voting on principle. I think we need a change. I don't think we need to be run by these posh boys. I think we're not all in this together. I think the tax rate on the rich has been cut, which I think is an obscenity by Osborne. And I think the Conservative Party is out of touch. So I think we need social justice, and we need to think of other parts of the country. We need to think of the northeast, Yorkshire, south and central, as you point out to me, because there are some Tories in Yorkshire, in the fields, and we've got to think of other parts of the country, not just London and the southeast.
So if you were, if somebody asked you to get back into politics now, I dare say you're not interested anymore.
For the Saga Party.
But for the Saga, who would you stand for Labour if they asked you to stand?
Oh, God, I'm not even. I'm back on the. I'm not even on the reserve benches, or what you call them. I mean, I'm just at the back of the stands. I mean, you're always, as a politician, you wish you were on the pitch and you're sure you could do it better. Doesn't mean a bloody thing, excuse my language, but anyway.
What about the House of Lords?
I'm an observer of it now.
What about the House of Lords?
No! I mean, House of Lords is worse than Oxford Circus at rush hour. The place is completely congested. It needs to be either abolished or seriously reformed. We've got nearly 900 peers now, again, having got rid of the hereditaries. This Prime Minister has created more and more of them. It's absurd. And, they can't find a seat. You have to go and have a coffee. I mean, the place is unbelievable.
But it's usually empty, though, when you see it on
it's
television.
Not. It's not. Well, for certain debates, but there are far too many. It's ridiculous.
And half of them are asleep when you watch them.
I think you've got to have an elected second chamber, I just think, or not a second chamber at all. But it's just the whole thing is a farce.
So if it was...
And friends of mine in the Lords think it's a farce.
Okay. So if it was elected, would you be interested in that case?
Well, would I be interested? I don't know. I'm a bit young for it. 65.
Would you be prepared to?
I think it's at a starting age. The House of Lords is.
Would you be prepared to align yourself if you were in there?
Oh, I don't want to align myself with anything or anybody. I'm not sure I want anybody to align themselves with me. I mean,
you could be a crossbencher.
I don't think I was ever a tremendous team player, and I was on the left of the Conservative Party when it did have that. I suppose Ken Clarke is the kind of person I was closest to. And he's now,
dying breed, really.
well, I mean, it's about him, Olu. I mean, he deserves a preservation order.
Peter Temple Morris, I remember, used to be on the left of the Conservative Party, wasn't he?
Loads
And
of
he got
folks-
thrown out, didn't he?
When I was chairman of the Pressure for Economic and Social Toryism, colloquially known as PEST,
Pest.
We had about, that was in 70,
Nice.
70, 74, we had about 50, 60, we had about 50 plus MPs who supported us, who were in the liberal wing of the Conservative Party. We had about half a dozen cabinet ministers, people like Willie Whitelaw, Peter Walker,
Ian Gilmore.
Robert Carr,
Yeah,
Ian
yeah.
Gill. Well, Ian was, I'm not sure he was in the cabinet there, but we had half a dozen, I mean, that breed doesn't exist anymore
Right,
now.
right,
That's what I mean about the Tory party. I mean, Theresa May said it was described as the nasty party when she was its chairman, and now she seems to be bent on making it nastier.
Yeah.
Let's get on to her.
No,
She
I-
makes Mrs. Thatcher look like a cuddly teddy bear.
That's saying something. That's quite a quote, yeah. But what about, goodness me, though, I listen to the UKIP and I think, well, if the Tories are nasty, what are UKIP? Goodness me, I think, he actually does have a way with words sometimes, Mr. Farage, but some of the things he says I think are outrageous. His remarks on HIV, I think Leanne Wood put him down very well, and your remarks were a disgrace, she said. And I think that it just showed him devoid of humanity.
Well, they came across as, I just think they were obscene, and she was right. Leanne, who's she's been I saw her described as a minor star of the campaign. I think she was good for her. It's a one-man band. I think it's full of odds and sods, isn't it?
The Welsh Plaid Cymru, you mean?
No.
Oh,
I like
UKIP.
Plaid. Good
UKIP.
God, let me correct that.
UKIP.
Friends with Plaid, Davers Wigley and Davers L, were
good for you.
colleagues of mine in the House of Commons. I'm
Okay.
very fond of them.
Right.
And I think they're good men, and they were extremely good constituency members, and what's more, they stood up valiantly for Wales. I think they're both terrific. They were terrific members of Parliament, and they're still around. I'm glad they're in the House of Lords. Plaid take seats in the Lords, SNP don't, which I think is a bit of a pity.
But UKIP's a one-man band, you're saying?
Well, yeah, it's a one-man band.
Yeah.
I think, look, the crucial thing this Thursday, is not how many seats they get, because quite frankly, it's not going to be more than 4. My personal view is they'll be lucky to get 2. I think they'll hold on to Clacton with Carswell. The next one that they're likely to win is Thurrock, not South Thanet. Thurrock is more of UKIP.
But Thurrock's a three-way
Yeah,
marginal.
but they're ahead at the moment in the Ashcroft polls, which I've been following because he's the only one who's been assiduously doing constituency polls. I think that the Tories are really out to get Farage, and I think that other parties there are swinging behind, if only to stop Farage. They don't want South Thanet to be tainted. But the crucial thing about UKIP is the percentage share of the vote, and its percentage share of the vote in the Tory-held marginals, which they could deliver to Labour by taking away the Tory vote. So that's their crucial role. Then the other thing is, of course, they may well get, say, 11, 12% of the vote with 2 members of Parliament, whereas the SNP may get 4% of the vote with 45, 50 members of Parliament, which could reopen the whole question of our electoral system.
Interesting, yeah.
So, that's going to happen. And by the way, there's all this business. I agree with the right-winger in the Tory party, Michael Forsyth, that I think the way the Conservatives have fought the campaign vis-à-vis Scotland is a disgrace. I think they're determined to win power even at the risk to the Union. And how David Cameron can argue that in the referendum they want to hold the country together and then sort of lambast Scotland in the disgraceful way that he has for sending MPs to Westminster. They're entitled to under the present system. It's illogical. It's contradictory. And anyway, don't let me get out. I'll deliver you a Russell Brand rant.
Just on the word of right-winger Michael Forsyth, though, he looks reasonably centrist in the Conservative Party these days, don't you think? He certainly doesn't sound like what's his name, Jacob Rees-Mogg or one
Oh,
of that.
Jacob Rees-Mogg.
Or Liam. Liam.
I will not have Jacob Rees-Mogg attacked. I mean, he's like the last.
He's almost in UKIP. He said that the Conservatives
yes,
should
but
have an alliance with UKIP.
I mean, he's so innocuous and ineffectual and delightful, and I mean, he's so eccentric and erratic. I mean, I don't think any party would really welcome him I mean, no. I mean, Jacob Rees-Mogg was just a law unto Jacob Rees-Mogg.
How about Liam Fox?
I think
then?
actually he's quite good. I've heard him on radio. He sometimes makes sense. I think he's away in the right, and his political opinions are ridiculous. But who was the one you mentioned before him?
I mentioned in the same breath Liam Fox. Compared to Liam Fox, Michael Forsyth looks quite liberal, I think.
I don't think Liam Fox is liberal, and I don't.
No, that's what I mean.
I don't hold anything for him.
I think Michael Forsyth reminds me a bit of Michael Portillo now. Okay, when Michael Portillo was in government, he portrayed himself as kind of like the candle bearer for the right wing.
I think we're now getting we're getting a little bit into personalities, and I think I can just hear kettles going on all over Shoreditch. With complete boredom. Sorry about this, David. But I think we might be interested in this. I don't think Michael Forsyth is. I think most of his views I think are anathema to me. Yeah. But I think his judgment on the Scottish situation is right.
Yes, that's right.
And as for John Major's entry into the fray and describing. As David Steele said nicely about him, John has never understood Scotland. I don't think John's ever understood England either, actually.
He understood cricket. David Steele. Understood cricket, didn't he?
Well, the most mediocre Prime Minister we've ever had, apart from Lord North.
Who?
Lord North.
That'd be off before my time. Having mentioned Michael Portillo, though, I will mention the fact that on BBC This Week programme, which probably has only slightly more listeners than we have, he said that he expected to see Ed Miliband in number 10 after the election.
Did you say that?
Yes, and so did Alan Johnson, and the other commentator who was on the show. I forget her name, Miranda somebody or another. She's a Liberal Democrat press officer or something. She said she thought Cameron had turned it because he's showing passion in his speeches and stuff. It's true that the Tories have gone up slightly since he's started to turn up the heat and the volume, but
he's entered his pumped-up Schwarzenegger phase. I don't find it terribly convincing.
No, but some people may do.
I think they've made a great mistake, the Tories, in relying on this Australian Linton Crosby as their great election guru. He apparently told them that it'll all turn in our favour in just before Christmas 2014. He then said, when nothing happened, it would happen before Easter 2015. He then said, well, as soon as Easter's over, it'll start swinging towards us. And now he's apparently, his last thing I heard was that he'd said it was going to turn towards them in the last 10 days. Well, it's not. And I think his strategy has been full of holes. I think it hasn't worked. I don't know why they had to import an Australian to do this, quite frankly. I think it shows, this is the trouble with our politicians. They should trust their own convictions, if they have any. I'm not sure David Cameron has many, or Osborne has, other than winning. Rather than importing an Australian. Why not someone from Finland or United States? United States political
Labour
gurus,
got somebody, didn't they?
They
from
got
the US?
David Axelrod, but he only texts them once every 10 days.
And he's getting paid how much money for that?
Well, I think it's absurd. I mean, I do think that you need maybe some people up on the latest social media techniques, if you call it like that, in which I'm barely literate. That's fair enough. But, oh, God, I have known a number of people in the States going way back who are involved in political campaigning. It's an industry there, and the amount of money in American elections. But when they start moving to other countries, they don't understand the political culture. And I think Crosby does. And, he just because he got Boris elected, I think Boris probably got himself elected.
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, and he restrained Boris from his numerous excesses, not successes. And so, perhaps he imposed, he was one of the few people Boris was frightened of.
Having mentioned America, though, let's just have a few words about the American election coming up. Do you think Hillary pretty much has it wrapped up? I mean, there is a fair way to go, but there isn't any other outstanding candidate, is there? Apart from Jeb Bush has entered the fray, but
I think the Republicans have got an extraordinary field of candidates, extraordinarily large. That's the first thing.
Yeah.
I think they've got people of ability in it. I mean, I don't agree with them. I am a Democrat. I always felt that she would have made a better president than Barack Obama, because I felt that he was, his track record was negligible. He comes virtually straight from Illinois state legislature, where he had a very mixed record, seemed to abstain most of the time. The U.S. Senate, no sooner was in the U.S. Senate, he was running for president. So I personally thought she was the stronger candidate. I think she is a strong candidate now. I think she's got a downside. The whole funding of the Clinton Foundation bill has a downside as well as an upside, and she's landed with the bill. In as the expression goes, and her age is an issue, and obviously she had a slight
65 or there.
No, she'd be 60. She'd be a few months younger than Reagan if she wins in 2016. Okay. So, but she will get probably an easy run through the primaries. Though you don't know what's going to happen. Iowa's a different. Well, it's a caucus, but it's difficult. And
but see, if she's 68 or whatever, that means you're still young enough to go back into politics, Keith.
Oh well, yes, I know, but I'm not Hillary Clinton. Anyway, I haven't got an obsessional like that. As for I think the others, I think Jeb Bush is probably one of the stronger candidates because he's centrist. But if they choose somebody like Rand Paul way out in the right, then I think she would be easily elected. Her problem is that she will not have been tried and tested during the primaries, and whoever comes out of the Republican primaries, it's a 5-6 month process between it starts roughly now, but the Iowa caucuses will be in December, January, and then it goes right through till June, although most of the primaries are in March. The Republicans will have a candidate who's been tried and tested in the fire. And she may have just sailed through, and she'll then find she's up against somebody who's really sharpened his act up, because it will probably be a he, and during the presidential election, she could find that tougher than she expects, and I'm sure she's aware of that.
Either way, it's a bit worrying, I think, that if it's Clinton versus Bush, I mean, it's got a bit of a familiar ring to it, hasn't it? Even though they never actually stood, the other Clintons and the other Clinton and the other Bushes never stood against each other. It's there's something about a dynasty ring there, isn't there?
Bill stood against George George H.W.
Right,
Herbert
sorry,
Walker,
yes, he died. Yes.
But no, yes, I think there is a problem, and I think the problem is money. I think the problem is the Supreme Court, which is not independent anymore, predominantly Republican. It was the Supreme Court which put George W. Bush into the White House, and I don't think he should have been. Because I think that, the way it was. But anyway, they were it went to them, and they're the ones who've opened the floodgates in terms of spending and how much can be spent. I mean, each candidate, the winning the two presidential candidates from either side are going to need $1 billion each.
Wow, $1 billion.
Yes.
Goodness me.
And she's, and that's the kind of money we're talking about. And, you need a good address book for that. I mean, George W. had his father's address book.
Yes.
Hillary has bills, and so on. I mean, there is a kind of hereditary aspect to this, which is, I think, deeply unattractive. I think Jeb Bush has always... I don't like some of his views at all, but I think he's probably more competent than his brother.
Yes, I think
he was the one in the family who people always thought would run for president rather than his brother.
He seems to have a better track record than
well,
his brother.
I don't know. I mean, he's got a Spanish wife which helps him with the Hispanic vote, but, I quite frankly...
But less divisive as a governor, no?
Barack Obama's been such a big disappointment.
Yeah.
And I always had a gut instinct that he would be, and I wanted him to succeed, but I just felt he wasn't experienced enough, and he did it too quickly. And I think he's too cerebral. He's too much like an academic.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, there we go.
Was that possibly the issue
with
Gordon Brown? Do you think?
What
was that? Get back to the UK. Do you think that was possible? Gordon Brown was too smart and too cerebral. Read too much intellectual stuff.
I think Gordon Brown had a lot of problems, but most people do. I think most of them have borderline personality disorder, so we're going into politics, and most of them get to the top. I mean, Tony Blair, for goodness sake. No. Gordon Brown, I once said to Anthony Selden, the biographer, that I thought the English reacted to Gordon Brown, the same way the Scots reacted to Mrs. Thatcher. He was almost too, and a bit like people in England reacted to Neil Kinnock. And I think there was something about him. He had that sinister look. Women who fell for Heathcliff kind of went for him, but I think he didn't have the temperament necessarily. There we go.
Anyway, so we're going to finish off in a minute. I'm just going to put you on the spot, Keith. You've told us how you're going to vote. What do you think that we'll see after the negotiations and things? Who's going to be in Downing Street with the support of whom?
I think it'll be a minority government. I think because you'll need two or more parties for a coalition. I think it's fragmented sufficiently for that. I think it'll be a minority government. I think it'll be more stable than people anticipate because of the Fixed Term Parliament Act. And because that government, like the SNP minority government between 2007 and 2011 in Scotland, basically got business through thanks to the Conservatives. The Conservatives don't talk about them doing deals with the SNP.
And neither do
the
SNP.
Scottish Conservative Party did deals with the SNP.
Yes. The SNPs don't like to talk about that.
That's a bit of a revelation.
But come on, is it going to be Cameron?
It was a stable government.
Are we going to have Cameron
I would like
or Miliband?
I would like to see Miliband. Yeah. I'd like to see Ed Balls. I'm very pro Ed Balls. I'd like to see him in the Treasury because I think he would be the best prepared Chancellor we've ever had. And he's made mistakes, but actually I think he's a highly intelligent guy. I think he'd be an impressive performer there, more impressive with Osborne, who's too political and too shallow. I would like to see Miliband. I think that the Tories are slightly ahead at the moment. I think there are more options to the Labour Party getting people to support them.
Right.
I think the Tories are running out of friends, and I think the Liberal Democrats may be important here, even if they get 25 seats, and their activists say don't want any more deal with the Tories, then Cameron's heading for the city to make his fortune, or joining his mother-in-law's interior decoration business.
Oh, that's an interesting prospect.
Or maybe joining Smithson's to design handbags with his wife.
And then who would we see lead the Tory party?
Who would lead the Tory party? Well, probably Boris.
Not Gove.
No, I don't. I think
or Osborne
burned his boats. No, Osborne's putting his. He knows that if Cameron goes down, he's too closely associated. I think Boris would get the Osborne network, i.e., the Osborne backbench group, to support him, and Osborne put his weight behind him. But I think the Teflon would start coming off Boris. I mean, Boris is just, Boris needs a fleet of 747s to carry his baggage, and he's got so much baggage. Probably need one of the
metaphorical baggage you're talking about.
He'd probably need one 747 just for the women in his life. So, I say that in the broadest possible terms. But as for the baggage, he'd need a fleet of 747s. And, it's all very well sharing have I got news for you? But question time is not have I got news for you. People get tired of that hair not being uncut,
and the
of
foppishness,
him ruffling it, blowing out his cheeks, as I saw him do not so long ago when he doesn't know the answer to questions. It's all terribly charming and funny for 5 minutes, but not when he's running the country. I think he would be. He's gone through 5 deputy mayors. Losing one is a misfortune. 2 is carelessness. 5. The man can't run a pub crawl. Maybe what do you call those bars where men go in and the ladies strip? What do you call them?
Strip bars.
No, something else. Whatever they are. Pole dancers.
Pole dancers or table dancers.
I think you'd be quite good at running a pole dancing club.
That's an idea. Boris Johnson, if you're listening, this is mostly in humour, and please do not contact your lawyer.
I don't think he's so lazy anyway. He's probably having a sleep. That's probably the most libelous, slanderous thing I've said about him. He hasn't been that great a mayor.
So
I don't think he has.
But as for Prime Minister Miliband, do you think that would work? You think he'd do all right, do you?
Well, it'd be interesting. I think it'd probably be better than his brother. I think he's not one of these namby-pamby new Labour people. I think he has got convictions, and I think that's why he stood against his brother. And I think he's performed as the Tories feared he would, and expected he would, by the way. He's performed much better in the election campaign. So people had low expectations of him, and people see that he's prime ministerial. He's kept his cool. He's only tripped off a platform once. I mean, why Nick Robinson of the BBC has to mention this, I do not know. But, you know, you just like
Yes.
But, you know, he's been basically pretty good. He's given some wrong answers. I think he was wrong about the answer on overspending. Ed Balls gave a far better answer to that question today on the world.
And I don't think he was terribly astute when he was talking about possible deals with the SNBI, that he could have sort of deflected it and said, well, you know... Well,
couldn't deflect it, I don't think.
I think he could go in the offensive and say, well, why don't the Tories rule out coalitions with UKIP?
Well,
you know,
I don't know, but that's not answering the question. Everybody says, you know...
That's what Blair would have done.
Well, I don't think he'd go away with it. I think the question's been so insistent and so incessant, I think he had to do something. I think what he got worried about by last Thursday was that this Tory argument, which I think is a disgrace, because I think they couldn't care down about the union, that basically what was happening was that they was playing badly in their marginals. The Tories were making ground on this. The Scots were about to invade from the north.
Yes.
You know, which is not going to happen, not in a nasty way. My fellow Scots are very civilised and sophisticated and will only be a boon to Westminster.
Aren't we? All Scots are very civilised. There you go. That's a good note to finish on, isn't it? And we look forward to seeing the results on Friday. And next week, I'll be by myself again, possibly with Daphne Barron, but I'm not actually quite clear about the guest for next week, so I won't make any promises. Liam will be back in 2 weeks' time. And thank you again to Keith for coming on and entertaining us with his opinions. Thanks to our producer, Delroy. And good night to you. Thank you. Bye-bye.
You're listening to Shoreditch Radio. ShoreditchRadio.co.uk.